Another week goes by, another layoff is announced. That seems like the common theme of today's job market, with Target joining the fray in announcing the cutting of 1,800 corporate roles in a turnaround effort. And this isn't of any major surprise given that they've been dealing with very public issues for the last several years and are struggling to remain relevant. And these 1,800 corporate roles are just the latest in a string of companies who are announcing major layoffs heading into the end of the year. Now, layoffs themselves, while significant, are not the issue here, but rather it's how they're going about doing them, because there seems to be a new trend that's emerging in the job market. And I shouldn't say new because this has been around for at least the last several years, but really since 2020, we have seen corporations taking a major step backward in how they treat people, which is kind of ironic given the term human resources. And they've kind of lost the human element of it. And so I'm going to explain what exactly they did and what the market is kind of shifting to. But I see a disturbing trend emerging. So let's talk through what's happening at Target specifically. So this must be the first wave of layoffs, because it says when 815 Target employees joined a 9 a.m. conference call on Tuesday, October 28th, to learn that they no longer had jobs. The news may not have been so shocking, given that the company had issued warnings just days prior of plans to reduce its staff. What's troubling isn't the fact that Target cut these hundreds of jobs in one fell swoop, but rather how the company did it, which was essentially a mass layoff all at the same time at a 9 a.m. conference call. People logged in, had no clue, and it's kind of like one of these things where everybody's on this call, no longer has a job. It's become such a commonplace thing to have such an impersonal approach to layoffs, and this is seeming to trend more and more in this direction. It used to be when you would get laid off, you would have somebody that would sit in front of you, face to face, delivering the bad news. There's the whole reason they hand you the pink slip. They'd slide the pink slip across the desk, but you were told face to face, and it was kind of like there was a level of respect, maybe, I guess you could call it that. At least they were delivering the news directly to you in a personal way. But we've gotten away from the human element of human resources, where companies are essentially just looking at people as a resource that's disposable. And once you're finished with them, you can just throw it away in the trash can and move on. These impersonal stories of layoffs have become such a common trend that it's almost like we're becoming desensitized to them. I cover these on my channel, not because I like talking about people getting laid off and all the jobs that are being eliminated, but rather I want to try to share these behaviors, these trends, this psychotic behavior by these companies, so that maybe somebody will see it. I know that there's a lot of human resources leaders. I know that there are a lot of executive types who do watch my channel and do pay attention to my content. And I feel like if we just accept what it is that they're doing, we never speak about it, we never talk out about it, that the people who are actually being impacted by these layoffs, these impersonal layoffs, will not have any kind of a voice. Yeah, sure, you can leave an exit interview, and the exit interview is probably going to get discarded the minute you walk out the door. But most people's voice is that they can go to a random video on the YouTube or on Reddit or somewhere else and leave a nasty comment, and it will likely never be seen. But in my case, people do actually see this channel, and I feel that it's important for us to continue to speak up about it. And that's why I bring this content forward. It's not to make people feel worse about the state of the job market, but rather it's to give people a voice and give people more strategy as they navigate these things. But as we look across the board, it's not just Target who's the issue. There's a lot of companies out there who are using this more impersonal method to lay people off. And there was a survey done recently of 1,000 people who had been recently laid off, and they asked them several questions, but one of them being is, how did you get laid off? How did you learn about it? And 30% were told in face-to-face meetings. So basically a third of people were told still directly face-to-face. Nearly the same percentage, 29%, received the news via email. So there was no conversation, no ability to ask questions, no ability to get clarification, no ability to try to understand a more deep why. It was just an email that showed up in their inbox letting them know the news. Then there's 28% who were called by the manager or human resources. So you got a phone call. So that's almost another third. And then the remainder heard about their layoff through other internal rumors before it became official. So I guess that's not really a formal way of knowing it, but video call, 5%, and then 2% said that they'd been laid off only by losing access to internal systems like Slack and email. And this was a layoff back in 2023 where approximately 12,000 people, 6% of Google's workforces were laid off that 1 week. And a lot of people found out through either an email, which is an abrupt and impersonal email. And this is after they commuted. And you got to think a lot of these Google offices are in major cities like the Bay Area, where a commute could represent two plus hours. And they're commuting all the way into the office for their work, no warning at all. Come to find out that their systems are shut off. They swipe their badge and can't get in the door. That's how they learned about their layoffs. So they got a lot of flack for this, and rightfully so, that they couldn't give the decency of at least letting the people know that they, I wouldn't go into the office unless I had to collect some personal effects, but I wouldn't go into the office. And oftentimes there's going to be somebody there. IT will have your stuff shut down before you even walk out the door. You won't be able to log into anything as soon as you get that message. If you see an email or get a pre-recorded video message, by the time you're finished watching that video or reading that email, your system is already shut off. That's how fast that they work. They sit side by side with IT, who then, as soon as they have this meeting, it's immediately shut down. And the reason being is that they're trying to limit people being able to go in and do a bunch of damage. And I guess that there was some Intel employee very recently who ended up getting terminated through a layoff and ended up basically stealing like 11,000 files from, I guess, secure files, and then ended up disappearing. Nobody knows where the guy is. So there is a very real issue of security when you get a person. Let's face it, it's very easy to get disgruntled and to be very angry. And there are people who do things that are probably could be damaging to employers. And let's face it, there could be and there's a very real possibility that employees could do something very damaging to employers, especially when you've got all the emotions running and you're just finding out about it and reacting. So that's why they shut down all these systems, and that's why they oftentimes will have the security department escort you out of the building immediately. And it's like a walk of shame. And you're thinking to yourself, like, why am I being treated this way? I didn't do anything wrong. I was a good employee, and I was considered to be a decent performer, and suddenly I'm being treated like I'm a convict, being escorted, down, doing the walk of shame past all my coworkers as they're all kind of looking out their cubes, watching me carry my box of stuff. But that's how layoffs work, and it's impersonal. Now, is it better to be laid off through email or through a video call and avoid this whole walk of shame or the commute into town? Now, I guess there's a potential argument that might actually be better. Do I need to sit down with a human resources person and have them just read through a script that's predetermined anyway? There's not a lot of deviation. I mean, listen to some of the videos that I've made recently about people who've recorded their layoffs. There's not really any discussion. They're not giving you any information. They're not going to tell you anything more than what's on the script because they're not able to. They're not supposed to. Because there's liability. Everything they say can't be used against them, etc. So they're trained to be very impersonal. And that's where the human resources name becomes just so off-putting, because humans are treated like resources. And anymore, they're treated like disposable resources. And this is what we're seeing is these companies doing these kinds of things more frequently. In fact, Klarna, who also, this is a couple years ago, but still, it's showing this trend that used to happen. We never used to have any of this stuff. This never used to be a thing. Practically every layoff that happened before 2020 was done in a personal way, where you're sitting in front of, usually it's a boss. Sometimes a human resources person will be in the room with you, but usually it's a boss. But now we've got companies like Klarna who are using a pre-recorded video to lay off 10% of their employees. It's just like one of these deals where we're just going to do this and get as far away from you as we can. And this is becoming more and more common. So you go through this whole process of being courted through the interview, right? It's impersonal. We've talked about that ad nauseum too, but it's impersonal. But you go through this whole process. You get courted, then you get onboarded. And what do they tell you in the onboarding? Everybody's family here. We all value our employees. Employees are our number one asset, blah, 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 blah. And what you start to realize after the last few years in this job market is that's all lip service. None of that stuff is actually meaningful. Maybe your boss, your immediate boss who is not involved directly in layoffs, usually, and by the way, usually your boss is not the person who is laying you off. Usually it is coming from people 2 and 3 layers up who are just looking at a spreadsheet, and they may ask bosses to put together like 9 boxes and things like that, where they'll kind of rank their groups, but oftentimes they're not even aware that they're doing it for that purpose either. They're not coming in saying, pick on your team who you can afford to lose because we're going to get rid of them. Usually it's done even be above them. Like you'll just have an informal meetings talking about like your yearly like performance appraisals or your kind of your yearly succession planning, and the boss's boss will say, who on your team do you think is high potential, who is needing a little bit more development. And it's not like you're circling these names because you want to lay these people off. I mean, I was a manager. We didn't do that because of that reason, but then suddenly there's a layoff, and then all the people that you had on the lower end of the box who were still good employees were suddenly being laid off. And that's just how it works. But oftentimes the manager used to be involved in these things. They would sit down and they would be the one to be the bearer of bad news. And listen, no manager, and I'll take it a step further, and I know people don't want to hear this, but no human resources person even wants to sit through these meetings. They're not fun. They're not pleasant. Nobody enjoys firing. Maybe some psychotic people at the very top do, but nobody at the bottom of the organization in the boots on the ground ranks enjoys doing this kind of stuff. It's all kind of like just following orders. Although I guess the world is full of people just following orders, and look where that's gotten us. But this is where the job market is heading or has headed. And, is it increasingly, I have some theories behind it. I wanted to cover one other thing quickly, but I have some theories behind why it is that they're moving more towards this impersonal. But this is actually a message from a article from a hiring manager. It's called Ask a Manager. And this manager is saying, I work in the tech sector, and this week is my fully remote company announced that they were going to be laying off the entire department. I'm a manager, so I knew about this about 24 hours before it happened. So the manager doesn't even get any advance notice. Oftentimes the manager is the one also getting laid off too. But what they did was send out a mass email to the department that was being laid off, letting them know that their computers would be shut down in 30 minutes. I mean, that's actually generous. A lot of people are asked why they would choose to lay off over a dozen employees, many of whom who have been working there for 5 or more years without so much as a Zoom call. Well, upper management hemmed and hawed and tried to deflect, but the reason boiled down to the following. Number 1, not wanting to make our HR person sit through 12 awkward firing meetings. Unfortunately, that's part of the job of a human resources person, is to sit in these meetings and to conduct them. It's like one of the unsavory things. We beat up on the human resource department and all that stuff, and sometimes they deserve it. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's a bad rap. Sometimes there's a lot of misunderstandings, but they get the brunt end of being the bearer of bad news. Like, nobody wants to be the executioner. Unless you're truly psychotic, which I'm sure there's some out there, but nobody really wants to be the executioner here. But to say that they don't want their HR person to have to go and do these meetings is just complete crap. That's just it's like a shit excuse for why you wouldn't want to have at least a personal touch. Whether you like the message or you don't, at least having somebody in there and giving you the ability to show some dignity of, we're going to put a person in here and actually deliver the news and not just give you some impersonal and cold email is another thing. And it says that email layoffs have been being best practices in many cases is what their reason being, and then wanting to avoid potential conflict with an upset employee. But the laid off employees made their thoughts well known on all employee Slack channels, so this won't even work. So they immediately go in and they start typing into Slack and blasting the company and potentially sharing things, stealing whatever, the stapler and all that stuff off their desk. But you're dealing with disgruntled employees. There's another dynamic here, though, that I think is becoming even more pervasive, which I also think is contributing to this. It's the rise of social media and people feeling the need to record every aspect of their work life and day. How many videos, even on this channel, have I shown of people deciding to record a termination, a layoff, etc., and having it be completely blown up, going viral, and everybody being put on blast because the employee wanted to make an example of? In some cases, it does that job. It puts people on blast. But in some cases, it's making the employee look toxic. And employers are increasingly becoming more aware and gun shy around social media. So there's becoming more social media policies, certainly becoming more employers checking social media accounts before they hire people because they want to avoid people doing this kind of stuff. So you're starting to see the impact of social media being one element. I think it's all these other elements. I think that, like for me, I think the social media is one piece of it. I think that there's also how frequently these things are happening, and they're very time consuming. If you're laying off 10,000 people, like like Amazon, etc., have done recently, think of the man hours that needs to take place. That's 10,000 man hours that you need. It's probably going to be an hour per call. And then you've got 10,000 of them. How much, like, I know this sounds terrible, but this is, if you think just strictly from a business perspective, how many hours is that going to take? And when you're an executive making decisions, it's easier just to hit the button and send out an email and save all of that money versus putting somebody in, 2 and 3 managers in who are making the equivalent of $100 an hour. It's a lot of money being saved. And that's what these executives are thinking. We're limiting our liability. We don't have to deal with an irate employee who keeps on, asking questions, getting more and more upset. We have to calm it down, and everything that the person says in these, everything that the human resources and or the manager says can be used at a later time against them. So they got to be really careful what they say. And now you start to get into a ball of wax. It gets to be a very tricky situation. And so I think that those are the main reasons why these companies are doing it. It's easier, it's cheaper, avoids conflict, and social media is becoming a much bigger thing. So is this the new norm? I think it's like once the bad reputation is out there, like the stigma, it's usually, I've talked about this in the past, like there's first movers. Companies out there who take the punch on the chin for everybody. But then once it becomes common, it just becomes common. Usually you see that with layoffs. Like there'll be a first mover in layoffs. Somebody will lay off people, and then everybody else will all the other companies will look around and go, oh gosh, well, they laid off. We don't have to be the first mover or the bad guy anymore. So now we're going to follow suit. And then suddenly everybody's laying off and they all start jumping on top of the trend. It's the same thing with this. So it's really disappointing to see that this is where the job market is going, as if it hasn't been impersonal enough through job search, getting ghosted, getting all the stuff that we've talked about. But now we're seeing a common trend in the layoffs that is just not great. So anyway, I wanted to share this trend and get your opinion on it. I think the question for me is, do you care about in-person layoffs? Do you care about being told face-to-face by a human resources person that you've never met before, or by your boss, etc.? Or are you okay with the impersonal nature of the email or a pre-recorded video because it's not going to change anything and saves you from having to go into the office and having to deal with kind of an awkward, squirming kind of situation? Let me know in the comments below. And if you have been laid off in the last few years, how have they let you know? Did they do it through any of these methods? What was the way? I'm just interested in seeing what people's personal experiences are. But anyway, if you are struggling in layoffs, that's what I specialize in. I created a channel called A Life After Layoff because I experienced a layoff myself and I wanted to help people navigate this. So you can check out my website, alifeafterlayoff.com. There's lots of resources over there, training, coaching, etc. And you can hopefully get back to work as quickly as possible. I know it's getting more and more difficult in today's job market, but there are still people getting hired. Anyway, appreciate you watching. We will see you on the next one.